March 27th, 1941. Sunderland, England. The keel plates of the SS Ocean Vanguard settled onto the slipway of the Joseph L. Thompson and Sons shipyard, beginning construction of what would become Britain's first emergency cargo vessel. The project, born from desperation as German U-boats strangled Atlantic shipping lanes, represented traditional British shipbuilding at its finest. Riveted construction, steam turbine propulsion, careful craftsmanship. Thompson's skilled workers estimated 18 months to completion, perhaps 15 if they pushed hard. Across the Atlantic, a Georgia farm boy turned industrialist was about to make that timeline obsolete. Henry J. Kaiser had never built a ship in his life. He'd made his fortune constructing dams and highways, pouring concrete and moving earth with an efficiency that shocked traditional contractors. Now, standing in a commandeered shipyard in Richmond, California, Kaiser was studying British ship plans with the eye of a man who built the Hoover Dam ahead of schedule. His assessment, delivered to a sceptical maritime commission in April 1941, was characteristically blunt. 18 months is unacceptable. We can build these in 60 days. The British plans are fine, but the construction method is medieval. We're going to build ships the way we build everything else in America, like we're making automobiles. The Maritime Commission officials exchanged glances. Kaiser's confidence seemed misplaced, perhaps dangerously so. Shipbuilding was an ancient craft, requiring skills developed over years of apprenticeship. You couldn't just apply assembly line techniques to vessels displacing 10,000 tons, except Henry Kaiser was about to prove you could. What followed was the most dramatic revolution in maritime construction history, a transformation that would see barely trained workers, many of them women who had never seen an ocean, building ocean-going freighters faster than Germany could sink them. The Liberty ship program would become the weapon that broke the U-boat blockade, not through technological superiority or tactical brilliance, but through the sheer overwhelming power of American mass production. The German Kriegsmarine, confident in their submarine warfare strategy, would watch in growing horror as their carefully calculated attrition rates became meaningless against an enemy that could replace 3 ships for every one they sank. The mathematics of industrial warfare were about to bury the Third Reich under an avalanche of welded steel. The crisis that birthed the Liberty ship began on September 3, 1939, when German submarine U-30 torpedoed the British passenger liner SS Athenia just hours after Britain declared war. 117 people died, including 28 Americans, establishing immediately that Germany's U-boat campaign would show no restraint. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of Germany's submarine fleet, had calculated that sinking 700,000 tons of Allied shipping monthly would strangle Britain into submission within a year. His Wolfpack tactics, concentrating multiple submarines against convoys, proved devastatingly effective. In 1940, U-boats sank 471 Allied ships totaling 2.2 million tons. In 1941, before America entered the war, they sank 432 ships totaling 2.1 million tons. British shipyards, even working at maximum capacity, could replace only a fraction of these losses. Traditional construction methods required 6 to 12 months per vessel. Skilled workers were in desperately short supply. Every ship lost represented years of construction time that Britain didn't have. The Ocean-class vessels, based on a simple British tramp steamer design, were Britain's attempt to speed production. At 4.41 feet long and 57 feet wide, displacing 14,200 tons fully loaded, they were basic cargo haulers with a top speed of 11 knots. Nothing fancy, just cargo holds and a reciprocating steam engine. Even simplified, British yards estimated 6 months minimum construction time per vessel. The United States, still technically neutral in 1940, agreed to build 60 Ocean-class ships for Britain under the Emergency Shipbuilding Program. American yards on the East Coast began accepting contracts, estimating similar construction timelines to their British counterparts. Traditional shipbuilding required building the vessel from the keel up, one section at a time, with thousands of rivets hand-driven by skilled workers. Then Henry Kaiser submitted his bid. Kaiser's proposal to the Maritime Commission in late 1940 was revolutionary. He would build entirely new shipyards on the West Coast using assembly line principles. Instead of constructing ships sequentially, he would prefabricate entire sections in workshops, then assemble them on the ways using electric arc welding instead of rivets. Workers would specialize in single tasks, requiring days of training instead of years. Most radically, he promised to reduce construction time to 90 days, then 60, then even less. The Maritime Commission, desperate for tonnage, approved construction of new yards in Richmond, California and Portland, Oregon. Kaiser was given a modified version of the British Ocean class design, simplified further for American construction. The vessel was redesignated EC2SC1, Emergency Cargo, Second Design, Steam Engine, C1 type hull. President Franklin Roosevelt, in a speech dedicating the program in September 1941, called them Liberty ships, a name that would define an era. The first Liberty ship keel, for the SS Patrick Henry, was laid at the Bethlehem Fairfield shipyard in Baltimore on April 30, 1941. Using traditional methods, the vessel took 244 days to complete, launching on September 27th. This was actually considered fast for the time. Kaiser's Richmond Yard No. 1 laid its first keel on December 14, 1941, exactly 1 week after Pearl Harbor thrust America into the war. The vessel, SS Ocean Vanguard, would take 150 days to complete. Already a significant improvement, but still not the revolution Kaiser had promised. But Kaiser wasn't done innovating. As his workers gained experience and his assembly line methods refined, construction times dropped dramatically. The second Richmond ship took 120 days, the fourth took 90 days. By mid-1942, Kaiser's yards were consistently completing Liberty ships in 60 days. The German naval intelligence was tracking these numbers with growing concern. The mathematics of their submarine campaign depended on sinking ships faster than they could be replaced. If the Americans could actually mass-produce cargo vessels in 60 days, the entire strategic calculation changed. Korvettenkapitan Günther Hessler, Dönitz's son-in-law and chief of U-boat operations analysis, delivered a report to U-boat headquarters in July 1942 that emphasized the threat. The Americans are applying automobile manufacturing techniques to shipbuilding. If their claimed production rates are accurate, our tonnage calculations become problematic. We must increase sinking rates proportionally or face strategic failure. Dönitz, confident in his wolf packs, wasn't yet worried. Sinking a ship took hours. Building one took months, regardless of American efficiency. The U-boat arm would simply sink more ships. What neither Dönitz nor his analysts fully grasped was the scale of American industrial mobilization. Kaiser wasn't building one shipyard. He was building 6, each designed to produce ships continuously. The Richmond yards alone would eventually employ 90,000 workers operating 24 hours a day. And Kaiser wasn't the only one building Liberty ships. By late 1942, 18 American shipyards across the country were constructing Libertas. The program was producing ships not in months or weeks, but eventually in days. The Liberty ship design itself was deliberately crude, optimized for rapid construction rather than performance or elegance. At 441 feet long with a 57-foot beam and 27-foot draft, the Liberty displaced 14,145 tons fully loaded. 5 cargo holds could carry 9,140 tons of cargo, 440 light tanks, or 2,140 jeeps, or 230 million rounds of rifle ammunition. The triple expansion steam engine, a design dating to the 1890s, was chosen specifically because it was obsolete. Thousands of engineers and machinists knew how to build and maintain reciprocating steam engines. The modern steam turbines used in warships required specialized expertise. Liberty ships used yesterday's technology, because yesterday's technology could be mass-produced by workers who learned their trade in weeks. The engine produced 2,500 horsepower, driving a single propeller to a top speed of 11 knots, slower than many U-boats. This didn't matter. Liberty ships travelled in convoys protected by escorts. Speed wasn't their purpose. Carrying capacity was. The construction method was purely American. Rather than building the ship continuously on the slipway, Kaiser's yards prefabricated massive sections in workshops spread across the shipyard. Hull sections weighing up to 50 tons were constructed inland, complete with piping, wiring, and internal structures. These sections were then transported on rails to the shipway and lifted into position by enormous gantry cranes. Welders would join the sections in days, work that would have taken weeks using riveted construction. The entire deckhouse, the superstructure containing crew quarters and the bridge, was built as a single unit weighing 150 tons and lowered onto the hull in one piece. The technique, called modular construction, allowed multiple sections to be worked simultaneously. While the keel was being laid, the bow section was being built in one workshop, the stern in another, the engine room in a third. The moment the keel was complete, finished sections were waiting to be assembled. Traditional shipbuilding required sequential construction. You couldn't build the upper decks until the lower decks were complete. Kaiser's method allowed everything to be built simultaneously, then assembled like a massive three-dimensional puzzle. The workforce was as revolutionary as the method. Traditional shipyards employed men who had served multi-year apprenticeships. Kaiser hired anyone who could hold a welding torch: housewives, farmers, clerks, teenagers. Many had never seen a ship before. They were given a few days of training on a single task, welding a specific joint or operating a particular crane, then put to work. Joseph Bechtel, a 17-year-old high school dropout from Oakland, started at Richmond Yard 2 in March 1942. His recollection, recorded in a 1985 oral history, captured the experience. I walked in never having held a welding torch. They showed me how to strike an arc, how to run a bead, 6 hours of instruction. The next day, I was welding hull plates on the SS John Muir. We worked 10-hour shifts 6 days a week. The noise was incredible. Hundreds of welding torches, cranes moving overhead, steel being cut and formed. It was chaos, but somehow it worked. Every day the ship got bigger. Every week you could see progress. It was like watching a building grow out of nothing. The workforce included unprecedented numbers of women. With men being drafted, Kaiser actively recruited female workers, eventually employing over 25,000 women across his yards. They worked as welders, crane operators, ship fitters, electricians. Inez Sauer, a former waitress, became one of Richmond's top welders. Her productivity, measured in linear feet of acceptable welds per shift, exceeded many male workers. When asked about her success in a 1943 interview, her response was characteristically direct. "Welding isn't about strength. It's about precision and patience. Women are perfectly suited for it. The men who said we couldn't do it were the same ones I outproduced every single shift." The yards operated 24 hours a day in 3 shifts. Workers arrived by the thousands on special trains and buses. The scale was staggering. Richmond Yard 2 covered 750 acres and included its own power, plant, fire department, hospital, and police force. It was a self-contained industrial city dedicated to a single purpose: building ships faster than Germany could sink them. Kaiser incentivized speed through competition. Yards competed against each other. Shifts competed against other shifts. Progress charts were posted prominently, showing which teams were ahead. Cash bonuses rewarded record-breaking performance. The spirit of competition drove continuous improvement. The Germans were tracking this industrial mobilization through intelligence reports and captured documents. A U-boat command analysis from October 1942 noted with concern that American shipyards had delivered 597 merchant vessels in the first 9 months of 1942, totaling over 5 million tons. German submarines had sunk approximately 1,000 Allied ships, totaling 6 million tons in the same period, but increasingly those losses were being replaced faster than projected. What the Germans didn't yet realize was that American production was still accelerating. The yards were learning, refining, improving. Construction times continued to drop, and then came the event that would become legendary in shipbuilding history, a publicity stunt that nevertheless demonstrated the terrifying potential of American industrial capacity. In November 1942, Henry Kaiser made a bet with the Maritime Commission. He claimed Richmond Yard 2 could build a complete Liberty ship, from keel laying to launch, in under 2 weeks. The Maritime Commission, sceptical but intrigued, agreed to observe the attempt. The vessel selected was SS Robert E. Peary, hull number 440. Kaiser assembled his best workers from across all shifts, organized them into specialized teams and stockpiled every component needed. Prefabricated sections were completed and staged. The engine was fully assembled and tested. Every pipe, wire, valve and rivet was ready. At 12:01 a.m. on November 8, 1942, the keel plates of Robert E. Peary touched the building way. What followed was the most intensive construction effort in maritime history. Welding teams worked continuously in coordinated waves. As one team finished a section, another moved in immediately. Cranes operated without pause, lifting sections into position every few hours. The deckhouse was installed on day 3, the engine lowered into place on day 4. By day 5, the vessel was recognisable as a ship. Maritime Commission observers documented every hour. Newsreel cameras captured the frenzy of activity. The entire nation watched as a 441-foot cargo vessel materialised in days. On November 15, 1942, just 7 days and 15 hours after the keel was laid, SS Robert E. Peary slid down the ways into the water, fully complete and ready for sea trials. The vessel had been built in 7 days, 15 hours and 30 minutes, 4 days, 15 hours and 30 minutes. The record would never be broken. The Robert E. Peary stunt was publicity, requiring pre-staging and special circumstances not repeatable in normal production. But it demonstrated what was possible, and it sent a message to Germany. American industrial capacity was essentially unlimited. The psychological impact on German naval command was significant. A U-boat headquarters analysis from December 1942 calculated that if Americans could build a ship in under 5 days, even as a stunt, their sustainable production rate might reach levels that made the submarine campaign unwinnable. Donitz requested additional U-boats, better torpedoes, anything to increase sinking rates. But Germany's industrial capacity was maxed out. They were building submarines as fast as possible, but they couldn't match American shipbuilding growth. The sustainable production rate Kaiser's yards achieved was remarkable enough without stunts. By early 1943, Richmond Yard 2 was averaging 1 Liberty ship every 30 days. With 12 building ways operating simultaneously, this meant they were launching a ship roughly every 2.5 days from that single yard. Across all 18 shipyards building Liberties, the United States was completing an average of 3 Liberty ships per day by mid-1943, 3 per day, 90 per month, over 1,000 per year, and production was still increasing. The Germans were sinking Allied ships at record rates. In November 1942, U-boats sank 118 ships. In March 1943, they sank 108 ships, including 72 from 2 convoys, SC-122 and HX-229, in the war's largest convoy battle. Donitz believed he was winning, but the mathematics were turning against him. In the first quarter of 1943, U-boats sank 203 Allied ships totaling 1.2 million tons. In the same period, American yards alone delivered 385 new vessels totaling over 2.9 million tons. Britain was building ships. Canada was building ships. But America was building more ships than Germany could possibly sink, even with their entire U-boat fleet operating at peak efficiency. Korvettenkapitän Hessler's April 1943 analysis was grimmer than before. American production has exceeded all projections. They are now building cargo vessels faster than we can destroy them. Even assuming optimal U-boat performance, which recent losses make impossible to sustain, we cannot achieve the tonnage deficit necessary for strategic success. The Liberty ships themselves, crude and unglamorous, were proving remarkably effective. Their 11-knot speed was adequate in convoy. Their massive cargo capacity, 940 tons, meant each ship could carry the equipment for an entire infantry battalion with supplies. Their simple engines, though old-fashioned, were reliable and easy to repair. Most importantly, they were expendable. Losing a Liberty was tragic for the crew, but strategically acceptable. Another would be launched tomorrow. Literally tomorrow. The crews manning Liberty ships were often as inexperienced as the workers who built them. The merchant marine expanded from 55,000 seamen in 1939 to over 215,000 by 1943. Many were teenagers on their first voyage. They faced the most dangerous duty of the war. Merchant marine casualties proportionally exceeded every military service. U-boats showed no mercy to cargo vessels. A single torpedo could send a Liberty to the bottom in minutes. In winter, North Atlantic convoys, survival time in the water was measured in minutes. Yet the ships kept sailing, and the crews kept signing on, knowing that every cargo delivered was a blow against the Nazi war machine. The Liberty's defensive armament was minimal. A single 3-inch or 4-inch deck gun on the stern, anti-aircraft guns amidships, and perhaps some machine guns. Navy armed guard units, typically 8 to 15 sailors, manned these weapons. They were hopelessly inadequate against a submarine, but they could defend against aircraft and surface raiders. some Liberty ships gained legendary status through their exploits. SS Stephen Hopkins, attacked by 2 German surface raiders in September 1942, fought back with her single 4-inch gun. Hopelessly outgunned by the raiders' heavy weapons, Hopkins nevertheless scored hits on the German ships before being sunk, but not before damaging one raider so badly it had to be scuttled. It was the only American merchant ship to sink a German surface warship in a gun battle. SS Jeremiah O'Brien, launched in June 1943, survived the D-Day landings and continued service into the 1990s, the last unmodified Liberty still operational. Now a museum ship in San Francisco, O'Brien still makes occasional demonstration voyages under her own power, a living testament to the durability of mass-produced shipbuilding. But most Liberty ships had unglamorous careers, carrying cargo from America to England to North Africa to the Pacific Islands. Trucks, tanks, ammunition, food, fuel, medical supplies, everything an army needed to fight, delivered in holds designed for maximum efficiency, not comfort or speed. The strategic impact became undeniable by mid-1943. Allied shipping losses, while still severe, were being replaced faster than they occurred. In May 1943, U-boat losses spiked dramatically as improved anti-submarine warfare tactics and technologies took effect. Dönitz withdrew his submarines from the North Atlantic temporarily, the first admission that the submarine campaign was failing. When U-boats returned to the Atlantic in the fall of 1943, they found convoys defended by escort carriers, long-range patrol aircraft, and improved sonar. The hunted had become the hunters, and behind every successful convoy crossing was the knowledge that ships lost could be replaced. The factories were running, the workers were building, the Liberty ships kept coming. German naval intelligence reports from late 1943 made increasingly desperate reading. An October analysis calculated that American production had delivered over 1,800 cargo vessels since Pearl Harbor, with production still accelerating. Even if U-boats sank 100 ships per month, a rate they could no longer sustain given their own losses, American production would still result in a net increase in Allied tonnage. The strategic objective of the U-boat campaign, strangling Allied logistics, had become mathematically impossible. Admiral Dönitz, reading these reports, understood the implications. In a November 1943 meeting with Hitler, he stated bluntly that the Americans had solved the logistics problem through sheer production capacity. Germany's submarine force, despite fighting with great courage and suffering terrible casualties, could not sink ships faster than American workers could build them. Hitler characteristically blamed his admirals for insufficient aggression, but the mathematics were irrefutable. You cannot win a war of attrition against an enemy with unlimited industrial capacity. The Liberty ship program expanded beyond Kaiser's yards. By 1944, shipyards in Houston, Los Angeles, Baltimore, Portland, Wilmington, and elsewhere were mass-producing Liberties. The design had been refined through hundreds of vessels' worth of experience. Problems were identified and corrected, welding techniques improved, assembly methods streamlined. The later Liberty ships were better than the early ones, built faster and with fewer defects. Quality control, initially a concern with such rapid construction, improved steadily. The Maritime Commission inspected every vessel thoroughly. Ships that didn't meet standards were rejected until corrections were made. The rejection rate dropped from nearly 20% in early 1942 to under 3% by 1944, as workers gained experience and procedures improved. Some Liberty ships did fail. The most notable problem was hull fractures. Several ships suffered catastrophic structural failures, literally breaking in half in heavy seas. Investigation revealed that welded construction, while faster than riveting, could propagate cracks across entire hull sections. Riveted construction contained cracks between rivet lines, limiting damage. The solution was relatively simple: add crack arresters, heavy steel straps across critical stress points that prevented cracks from propagating. Improve welding procedures, especially in cold weather when steel became brittle. Use better steel alloys with improved low-temperature properties. By mid-1943, these modifications were standard, and catastrophic failures became rare. The few Liberty ships that did break apart became cautionary tales used to improve the entire fleet. SS Schenectady split in half while pierside in calm water in January 1943. Investigation revealed welding defects and brittle steel. The findings led to improved standards that prevented similar failures across thousands of ships. Even failures contributed to the program's success. Every problem was analysed, solved, and the solution applied fleet-wide. This systematic approach to quality improvement was itself revolutionary. Traditional shipbuilding relied on master craftsmen to prevent problems through skill and experience. Kaiser's yards relied on engineering analysis and statistical process control, identifying problems systematically and solving them through procedural changes. By 1944, the Liberty ship program had achieved a level of efficiency that seemed impossible just 3 years earlier. The average construction time had stabilized at around 42 days from keel laying to launch. Some ships were built faster, some slower, but 42 days was the sustainable average across all yards. At this pace, American yards were producing a Liberty ship every 8 hours. The war in Europe was being won through logistics. Every Liberty ship that docked in England delivered the supplies that kept armies advancing. Fuel for tanks, ammunition for artillery, food for soldiers, trucks for transport, medical supplies for hospitals. The unglamorous but essential cargo that modern warfare consumed in vast quantities. Operation Overlord, the D-Day invasion, required the largest logistics effort in history. The planning assumed 90 Liberty ships would be dedicated solely to the invasion supply chain, with dozens more supporting follow-on operations. In the event, over 200 Liberty ships participated in Neptune, the naval phase of Overlord, carrying the vehicles, ammunition, and supplies that enabled the Normandy breakout. German commanders in France, watching the endless stream of supplies flowing across the beaches, understood they were facing an enemy with essentially unlimited resources. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, inspecting coastal defences before D-Day, reviewed intelligence reports on American shipping capacity. His assessment, delivered to Hitler in May 1944, was characteristically blunt. The Americans are producing cargo ships faster than we can count them. Even if we stop every invasion vessel at the waterline, which we cannot, they will simply send more. We are not fighting an army. We are fighting a factory. In the Pacific theatre, Liberty ships were equally crucial. The vast distances involved in Pacific operations required enormous quantities of shipping. Every advance across the island chains required transporting troops, equipment and supplies thousands of miles across open ocean. Liberty ships formed the backbone of this logistics chain. The ships operated in waters where Japanese submarines, while less effective than German U-boats, still posed a threat. Japanese aircraft attacked merchant convoys regularly. Kamikaze strikes in 1945 damaged or sank several Liberty ships, but the losses were acceptable because replacements were already on the way. The industrial strategy that defeated Germany in the Atlantic worked equally well against Japan in the Pacific. SS Albert W. Grant survived a kamikaze strike off Okinawa in April 1945. The Japanese aircraft crashed into the deckhouse, starting fires and killing several crew members. The ship's Navy-armed guard shot down 2 more attackers. Despite severe damage, the Grant was towed to safety, repaired, and returned to service within 6 weeks. The durability of Liberty ship construction, criticised as crude by traditional shipbuilders, proved life-saving in combat conditions. By early 1945, the Liberty ship program was winding down. The U-boat threat had been essentially eliminated. Allied control of the Atlantic was total. The focus shifted to Victory ships, a faster design with turbine engines, though Liberty production continued. The last Liberty ship, SS Albert M. Bow, was delivered in October 1945 after the war ended. The final statistics were staggering. Between 1941 and 1945, American shipyards built 2,810 Liberty ships. The total cost was approximately $2 billion, or about $740,000 per vessel, roughly $13 million in 2025 currency. For comparison, a modern cargo ship costs $150 to $200 million. The Liberty ships represented 29% of all merchant shipping built by the United States during the war. They carried 75% of all cargo shipped to overseas theatres. At peak strength in late 1944, over 2,400 Liberty ships were in active service simultaneously, representing nearly 30 million tons of cargo capacity. 200 Liberty ships were lost to enemy action, less than 8% of those built. German U-boats accounted for most losses, but aircraft, mines, kamikaze attacks, and surface raiders also took their toll. While 900 merchant seamen died aboard Liberty ships, brave men who served without the recognition given to military personnel but faced dangers equally great. The post-war fate of Liberty ships was varied. Many were laid up in reserve fleets, anchored in rivers and bays as strategic reserves. Some served for decades. Greece purchased over 500 surplus Liberty ships after the war, forming the foundation of what would become the world's largest merchant fleet. Liberty ships served under dozens of flags well into the 1970s. A few remained in commercial service into the 1980s. At the Naval History and Heritage Command in Washington, preserved documents include U-boat headquarters, reports from throughout the war. The progression of German assessment regarding Allied shipping reveals the gradual realization that they were losing the tonnage war. A May 1944 analysis is particularly stark. American merchant construction has exceeded 45 million tons since 1942. Our U-boat arm, at peak efficiency, managed to sink approximately 13 million tons of Allied shipping in the same period. Even accounting for British construction, Allied tonnage has increased by over 25 million tons. The Americans have won the logistics war through industrial capacity that we cannot match or counter. Recommend reassessment of strategic objectives. Dönitz's response, noted in the margins, was resigned. Continue operations, there is nothing else to be done. The Liberty ship represented more than efficient construction or clever engineering. It represented a fundamental difference in how America approached warfare. German military thinking emphasized tactical excellence, superior training and technological advantage, quality over quantity. American thinking emphasized systematic production, overwhelming resources, and the assumption that enough quantity became its own quality. Both approaches had merit. German fighters were better than American fighters individually. German tanks were better than American tanks individually. German submarines were better than American destroyers individually. But America built 3 fighters for every German fighter, 5 tanks for every German tank, and 50 destroyers for every German submarine. And behind them, keeping them supplied, armed, and fueled, were 2,710 Liberty ships carrying everything from bullets to boots across oceans that Germany could no longer effectively contest. Henry Kaiser, testifying before Congress in 1946 about the wartime shipbuilding program, was asked about the Liberty ship's significance. His response captured the essence of American industrial warfare. We didn't build the best ships. British shipbuilders, given time and resources, could build better vessels. What we built was enough ships, delivered fast enough, in quantities large enough, that the enemy's counters became irrelevant. Every ship we built replaced one they sank plus one more. Every month we got further ahead. Eventually they ran out of time, resources, and men. We had all 3 in abundance. That's how you win an industrial war. You bury the enemy under an avalanche of adequate equipment delivered in overwhelming quantities. The Liberty ship was adequate, but 2,110 of them were overwhelming. The German officers who underestimated the Liberty program in 1941, dismissing American shipbuilding capacity as irrelevant, learned a hard lesson about industrial warfare. You cannot torpedo your way to victory against an enemy that builds ships faster than you can sink them. By 1943, the lesson was clear. By 1944, it was too late to matter. The Atlantic belonged to the Allies, filled with Liberty ships carrying the material that would crush the Third Reich. SS John W. Brown, one of 2 surviving operational Liberty ships, still makes occasional voyages from Baltimore. Walking her decks, you can see the crude simplicity of her construction. Welded seams, basic fittings, utilitarian design. Nothing fancy, nothing elegant. Just a big metal box with an engine, designed to carry cargo from here to there as cheaply and quickly as possible. But in that crude simplicity lay the weapon that won the Atlantic. The Germans had built the best submarines in the world, manned by brave and skilled crews, armed with excellent torpedoes. They deployed them in innovative tactics that maximized their effectiveness. They sank over 3,500 Allied ships during the war. And they lost anyway, because behind every ship they sank were 3 more under construction. The thunder of riveting guns had been replaced by the hiss of welding torches. The years-long apprenticeships had been replaced by days of training, the careful, Craftsmanship had been replaced by assembly line efficiency, and the result was 2,110 Liberty ships that filled the seas and broke the blockade. German officers had underestimated American industrial capacity, believing that rapid wartime expansion would produce inferior results. They were partially correct. Liberty ships were inferior to traditionally built vessels in many ways. They were slower, cruder, less elegant. But they were adequate for their purpose, and there were 2,110 of them. In war, adequate in overwhelming quantities defeats superior in limited numbers. The Liberty ships proved this truth across every ocean. They didn't need to be the best, they just needed to be enough, and by 1945 they were more than enough. They were everywhere. The strategic impact of the Liberty ship program extended far beyond simply replacing sunk tonnage. By mid-1943, Allied planners had shifted from defensive logistics, simply maintaining supply lines, to offensive logistics, accumulating the massive stockpiles needed for major operations. This transition was only possible because Liberty ship production had created a surplus of cargo capacity. In June 1943, the combined chiefs of staff began planning for Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily. The operation required transporting 160,000 troops, 14,000 vehicles, 600 tanks, and 100 guns across the Mediterranean, along with ammunition, fuel, and supplies for sustained operations. The planning staff initially estimated 18 months would be needed to accumulate sufficient shipping. With Liberty ships entering service at 3 per day, the timeline was reduced to 6 weeks. The invasion launched on July 10, 1943, supported by 237 Liberty ships carrying the bulk of supplies and equipment. General Major Friedrich von Mellenthin, Chief of Staff for the German forces in Sicily, noted in his wartime diary that Allied logistics appeared unlimited. Supply dumps near the beaches, he wrote, contained more ammunition than the entire German army in Sicily had available. American trucks seemed to outnumber Italian civilians. The material superiority was so overwhelming that tactical excellence became irrelevant. We could win every battle and still lose the campaign because they simply had more of everything. The Liberty ships made this possible. Each vessel could carry enough ammunition for an entire corps for a week of intense combat, or enough fuel for an armoured division's operational range, or enough food for 50,000 men for a month. Multiply that capacity by 237 ships, and the scale of Allied logistics becomes apparent. In the Pacific, Admiral Chester Nimitz faced different challenges. The island-hopping campaign required projecting force across thousands of miles of ocean, establishing advanced bases on captured islands, and maintaining supply lines that stretched from California to the Philippines. Every advance required transporting the materials to build bases, runways, harbours, and fuel depots on islands that often had nothing but coral and jungle. Liberty ships, modified as cargo carriers, tankers, and even repair ships, formed the foundation of this logistics network. The famous Seabees, naval construction battalions, travelled aboard Liberty ships along with the bulldozers, concrete, steel, and fuel they needed to transform coral atolls into forward operating bases. Commander Joseph Tausig, logistics officer for the Mariana Islands campaign, later calculated that the capture and development of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam required delivering 650,000 tons of supplies and equipment during the first 3 months of occupation. This required 78 Liberty ship voyages, not counting tankers and specialized vessels. Without the Liberty program's massive capacity, he concluded, the Central Pacific campaign would have been impossible on the timeline achieved. The Japanese, like the Germans, had underestimated American industrial capacity. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of the Pearl Harbor attack, had warned his superiors that America's industrial potential would overwhelm Japan in a prolonged war. His famous statement that he could run wild for 6 months but guaranteed nothing afterward proved prophetic. Japan's merchant fleet, never large enough for their empire's needs, was systematically destroyed by American submarines. By 1944, Japan had lost over 8 million tons of merchant shipping and lacked the industrial capacity to replace losses. American shipyards, meanwhile, were building Liberty ships faster than Japan could count them. A captured Japanese naval intelligence report from August 1944, translated by American interrogators, assessed Allied logistics capacity with remarkable accuracy. The Americans have achieved merchant production that exceeds our most pessimistic estimates. Their Liberty ship program alone has delivered more tonnage than our entire merchant fleet possessed in 1941. Combined with their tanker production and specialized vessels, American logistics capacity appears unlimited from our perspective. This material superiority negates our tactical advantages. We cannot sink what we cannot reach, and their cargo vessels operate under air and surface protection we cannot penetrate. The report concluded that Japan's strategic position was hopeless unless American will to continue the war collapsed, an outcome they assessed as unlikely given American losses remained relatively light compared to Japanese casualties. The Liberty ships also served roles beyond simple cargo transport. Several were converted to specialized purposes that revealed the design's flexibility. 40 Liberty hulls were converted to tankers, designated T2 SE A1, carrying aviation fuel, diesel, and gasoline to forward areas. The conversion required replacing cargo holds with tanks, adding pumping systems and implementing safety measures for volatile cargoes. The converted tankers performed adequately, though they were slower and less efficient than purpose-built tankers. 8 Liberty ships were converted to aircraft transports, modified to carry fighter aircraft in their holds and on deck. These vessels could transport up to 60 fighters or 30 medium bombers, delivering aircraft to forward bases without requiring ferrying flights that consumed pilot time and aircraft operational hours. The conversions featured reinforced decks and specialized tie-down systems to prevent cargo shifting in heavy seas. 36 Liberty ships were converted to troop transports, though the conversions were minimal. Bunks were installed in cargo holds, and sanitary facilities added, but the ships remained uncomfortable and slow compared to purpose-built transports. They served primarily for transporting labour battalions, replacements, and low-priority movements where speed wasn't critical. Some Liberty ships were converted to hospital ships, painted white with large red crosses, carrying wounded from combat zones to rear-area hospitals. The conversions included surgical facilities, recovery wards, and medical equipment. While slow, the Liberty hospital ships provided essential service, evacuating casualties from Pacific Islands and European ports. The most unusual conversions were experimental. 2 Liberty ships were fitted with flight decks and used as aircraft ferries, though they never operated aircraft. Several were used as ammunition ships, filled with explosives and positioned near invasion beaches to resupply warships. This dangerous duty occasionally ended tragically. SS E. A. Bryan and SS Quinall Victory, ammunition ships at Port Chicago, California, exploded in July 1944 while being loaded, killing 320 men in the largest home front disaster of the war. By late 1944, the strategic situation had shifted dramatically from the dark days of 1942. Allied merchant tonnage had grown to over 50 million tons, compared to about 30 million tons in 1941. Despite losing thousands of ships to enemy action, the Allies had more cargo capacity than when the war began. This was almost entirely due to American construction, particularly the Liberty ship program. The U-boat force, which had terrorized the Atlantic in 1942 and early 1943, was now the hunted. Improved radar, escort carriers providing air cover, long-range patrol aircraft, and code-breaking allowed Allied anti-submarine forces to locate and destroy U-boats with increasing efficiency. In 1944, Germany lost 241 U-boats, while sinking only 67 Allied ships in the Atlantic. The exchange rate had reversed catastrophically. Dönitz, now commanding the entire German Navy after predecessor's dismissal, continued U-boat operations despite the losses. His reasoning, stated in a February 1945 meeting with Hitler, was that even ineffective U-boat operations tied down Allied resources. Every escort ship hunting submarines was a ship not available for other duties. Every patrol aircraft searching for U-boats was an aircraft not bombing Germany. This logic was flawed. The Allies had enough resources to hunt submarines and do everything else simultaneously. The Liberty ships had solved the logistics problem so completely that the Allies could afford to dedicate hundreds of vessels and aircraft to anti-submarine warfare while still maintaining every other operation. The Battle of the Atlantic was won not by sinking the last U-boat, but by achieving such overwhelming logistics superiority that U-boats became strategically irrelevant. Whether they sank 10 ships or 100 ships per month didn't matter when American shipyards were producing 3 ships per day. As 1945 began, the end was approaching for Germany. Allied armies were advancing from east and west, squeezing the Third Reich between forces supplied by the logistics network that Liberty ships had made possible. Every day, Liberty ships docked at Antwerp, Cherbourg, Naples and other ports, disgorging the supplies that kept armies advancing. The Germans, by contrast, were starving for resources. Their synthetic fuel plants were being bombed into rubble. Their remaining merchant fleet, trapped in Baltic ports, couldn't break through Allied naval blockades. Their domestic transportation system was collapsing under Allied air attacks. The material contrast between the two sides had become so extreme that German soldiers joked bitterly about it. A common saying among German troops in early 1945 was, "When we hear a plane, we look up. If it's camouflaged, it's British. If it's silver, it's American. If it's invisible, it's Luftwaffe." Another joke noted that the Americans didn't need to fight. They could just bury Germany under their supply dumps. The humour was gallows humour, recognising an uncomfortable truth. Germany had lost the industrial war so completely that military resistance was becoming pointless. Superior training and tactical skill couldn't overcome a 10-to-1 disadvantage in ammunition, a 20-to-1 disadvantage in vehicles, and a 100-to-1 advantage in logistics capacity. The Liberty ships, unglamorous and often unnoticed, had created this material supremacy. They weren't glamorous like battleships or intimidating like bombers. They were just cargo haulers doing their job day after day, voyage after voyage, delivering the unglamorous but essential supplies that modern armies consumed. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. The final logistics statistics were overwhelming. The United States had shipped over 250 million tons of supplies to overseas theatres during the war. Liberty ships had carried roughly 75% of this cargo. The Mediterranean theatre alone received 27 million tons, the European theatre received 92 million tons, and the Pacific theatres received 87 million tons. Every gallon of fuel, every bullet, every bandage, every meal had crossed the ocean in merchant ships, predominantly Liberties. The German surrender found approximately 2,000 Liberty ships in active service worldwide. Another 400 were in various stages of construction, mostly completed but awaiting final outfitting. Production ceased immediately. The remaining hulls were either completed for post-war service or scrapped on the ways. The Victory ship, a faster and more capable design that had entered production in 1944, continued in production through mid-1945. These vessels incorporated lessons learned from Liberty ship operations but served primarily post-war roles. The Liberty had done its job. The war was won. The Pacific War continued until August 1945. The planned invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall, would have required the largest logistics effort in history. Planning documents estimated that 1,500 Liberty ships would be needed to supply the invasion forces and maintain operations through the expected year-long campaign. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki rendered these plans moot. Japan surrendered on August 15, 1945, before the invasion began. The Liberty ships that would have supported Operation Downfall instead carried occupation forces and began the process of returning millions of servicemen home. Operation Magic Carpet, the repatriation of American forces, utilized every available transport vessel. Liberty ships, configured to carry troops, brought soldiers home from Europe and the Pacific. The vessels were slow and uncomfortable, but servicemen didn't care. They were going home. Between September 1945 and December 1946, over 8 million American servicemen were transported home, many aboard Liberty ships making their final military voyages. The post-war disposal of the Liberty fleet presented enormous challenges. The Maritime Commission suddenly possessed over 2,000 cargo vessels with no immediate purpose. Storage capacity didn't exist for that many ships. The solution was to create reserve fleets, collections of laid-up vessels anchored in protected waters, maintained in preservation status for potential future reactivation. The James River Reserve Fleet in Virginia became the largest, eventually holding over 800 vessels. Similar fleets were established in California, Texas, and other locations. The ships, painted grey and stripped of unnecessary equipment, sat at anchor by the hundreds, silent testimony to wartime production capacity. Many Liberty ships were sold to foreign governments and commercial operators. The vessels, available cheaply as war surplus, offered excellent value for nations rebuilding merchant fleets. Greece, as mentioned, purchased over 500 Liberty ships, forming the foundation of their post-war maritime industry. Norway, Britain, France, Italy and other nations also purchased liberties in quantity. American shipping companies, facing post-war demand for cargo capacity, purchased hundreds of Liberty ships and operated them commercially. The vessels served on trade routes worldwide, carrying peacetime cargoes under American, Greek, Liberian, Panamanian and other flags. The Liberty ships proved remarkably durable in commercial service. Their simple engines, while slow and inefficient by modern standards, were reliable and easy to maintain. Third world ports with limited repair facilities could service Liberty ships using basic tools and standard parts. This accessibility extended their service lives far beyond original expectations. Some Liberty ships served into the 1970s, 30 years after construction. A few reached the 1980s. This longevity wasn't because they were exceptionally well built, they weren't, but because they were simple, tough, and economically viable for operators who couldn't afford modern vessels. The SS Jeremiah O'Brien, preserved as a museum ship in San Francisco, represents this durability. Built in 57 days in 1943, she served in the Atlantic and Pacific, participated in the D-Day invasion, and remained in service until 1946. Reactivated during the Korean War, she served until 1953, then entered the reserve fleet. Rescued from scrapping in 1979, she was restored to operating condition and remains functional today, the last unmodified Liberty ship still capable of sailing under her own power. In 1994, O'Brien sailed from San Francisco to Normandy for the 50th anniversary of D-Day, crossing the Atlantic under her own power at age 51. The voyage demonstrated the fundamental soundness of her construction. She made the return voyage equally successfully, proving that mass production and rapid construction hadn't compromised essential quality. The SS John W. Brown, preserved in Baltimore, is the only other operational Liberty ship. Like O'Brien, she makes occasional demonstration cruises, offering the public a chance to experience what sailing aboard a Liberty ship was like. The experience is instructive. The vessel is noisy, the engine's triple expansion machinery clanking and hissing. She's slow, even at flank speed barely exceeding 11 knots. The accommodations are Spartan. There's no air conditioning, minimal amenities, cramped quarters, but she's seaworthy. Her hull is solid. Her engine, 70 years old, runs reliably. She handles well in heavy weather. The fundamental design, optimized for rapid construction and adequate performance, produced a vessel capable of decades of service despite being built in weeks. The Liberty ship's legacy extended beyond the vessels themselves. The construction techniques pioneered in Kaiser's yards revolutionized American shipbuilding. Modular construction, prefabrication, and welding became standard practices. The statistical process control and systematic quality improvement methods developed during Liberty production influenced post-war manufacturing across all industries. The workforce trained in Liberty shipyards carried their skills into post-war industries. Welders, crane operators, ship fitters, electricians who learned their trades building Liberty ships applied those skills to construction, manufacturing, and other sectors. The training programs developed to rapidly qualify workers became models for post-war vocational education. The women who worked in Liberty shipyards, demonstrating their capability in roles previously reserved for men, contributed to social changes that accelerated after the war. While many female workers were pushed out of industrial jobs when men returned from military service, the precedent had been established. Women could do industrial work as effectively as men. This reality, demonstrated in Kaiser's yards and similar facilities, supported the women's rights movements of subsequent decades. Henry Kaiser, who had never built a ship before 1941, emerged as an industrial legend. His Liberty ship program demonstrated that innovation, systematic organization, and willingness to challenge conventional wisdom could achieve results that experts considered impossible. Kaiser applied these lessons to post-war ventures, creating Kaiser Aluminum, Kaiser Steel, and Kaiser Permanente, one of America's largest healthcare organizations. The Liberty ship program also validated American industrial strategy for the Cold War. The Soviet Union, observing American production capacity during World War II, recognized that matching American industrial output would be extremely difficult. Soviet post-war military strategy emphasized weapons that didn't require matching American production capacity: nuclear weapons, missiles, and submarines rather than attempting to build equivalent logistics capacity. Some historians argue that the Liberty ship program, more than any battle or campaign, convinced Soviet leaders that direct military confrontation with America would be suicidal. The ability to produce 2,710 cargo ships in 4 years, while simultaneously building thousands of aircraft, tanks, trucks, and warships, demonstrated industrial capacity that exceeded Soviet capabilities by orders of magnitude. The program's financial aspects were equally impressive. The total cost of $2 billion represented excellent value. Each Liberty ship, at approximately $740,000, cost less than a single B-29 bomber, which ran about $850,000. Yet the cargo capacity provided by 2,710 Liberty ships was arguably more strategically valuable than even the strategic bombing campaign. Wars are won by armies that are supplied, equipped, and fed. The Liberty ships ensured Allied armies never lacked for supplies. The return on investment was measurable. Without adequate cargo capacity, the European and Pacific campaigns would have taken years longer, cost millions more casualties, and consumed vastly more resources. The Liberty ships, by solving the logistics problem, allowed Allied forces to maintain continuous offensive operations that gave the Axis no time to recover or reorganize. Military historians analyzing the war's decisive factors consistently rank logistics among the top 3, along with intelligence and air power. The logistic superiority that enabled Allied success was directly attributable to the Liberty ship program, creating cargo capacity far exceeding Axis' ability to destroy it. Some surviving German officers, interviewed decades after the war, acknowledged that the Liberty ship represented a type of weapon they hadn't anticipated. Kapitän José Hans-Georg von Friedeburg, who surrendered the German U-boat force in May 1945, spoke at a 1962 naval conference about lessons learned from the Battle of the Atlantic. "We focused on sinking ships," he said, which was the traditional naval objective. The Americans focused on building ships faster than we could sink them, which was an industrial objective. They understood the war better than we did. We were fighting World War I with improved technology. They were fighting an industrial war, where production capacity mattered more than tactical excellence. The Liberty ship wasn't a better cargo vessel than traditional ships. It was an adequate cargo vessel produced in overwhelming numbers. That adequacy, multiplied by thousands, defeated our best efforts. His counterpart, Admiral Dönitz, never publicly acknowledged the strategic failure of the U-boat campaign. In his memoirs, published in 1958, he blamed insufficient U-boat construction, lack of air support, and Allied technological advantages for the failure. He mentioned American shipbuilding only briefly, noting that production rates exceeded pre-war intelligence estimates. But private documents, released decades later, revealed Dönitz understood by mid-1943 that the tonnage war was lost. His continued prosecution of U-boat operations despite unsustainable losses represented strategic desperation rather than rational calculation. Unable to admit failure to Hitler, Dönitz continued sending submarines to their doom, achieving nothing strategically but costing thousands of German lives. The human cost of the Atlantic War was staggering on both sides. Germany lost approximately 27,000 U-boat crewmen killed, roughly 75% of all who served. Allied merchant seamen suffered approximately 30,000 killed, with Americans accounting for about 8,500 of these deaths. Both communities, U-boat crews and merchant seamen, faced some of the war's highest casualty rates. The merchant seamen who crewed Liberty ships received minimal recognition. They weren't military personnel, though they faced military dangers. They received merchant wages rather than military pay. They weren't eligible for military benefits or veterans services after the war, yet they served in conditions often as dangerous as frontline combat. A torpedo strike on a Liberty ship meant death came in seconds or minutes. In winter, North Atlantic convoys' survival time in the water was under 5 minutes. Lifeboats offered minimal protection from exposure. Rescue wasn't guaranteed. Ships in convoy, fearing submarine attack, often couldn't stop to pick up survivors. Men died watching rescue sail past because stopping endangered other vessels. The merchant seamen knew these risks and sailed anyway. They were motivated partly by patriotism, partly by wages that, while not military hazard pay, exceeded shore employment. Many were young men exempt from military service due to age or medical conditions, who wanted to contribute to the war effort. They found their place on Liberty ships carrying the cargoes that would win the war. After the war, merchant seamen gradually gained recognition for their service. In 1988, the Veterans Administration finally granted them veteran status, over 40 years late. Surviving Liberty ship crews received the recognition they deserved, though most were elderly by then, and many had already died. The Liberty ships themselves faced varied fates. Of the 2,110 built, 200 were lost to enemy action during the war. Another 30 were lost to marine casualties, storms, groundings, and other non-combat causes. The remaining 2,480 survived the war. Of these survivors, about 800 were retained in American reserve fleets through the 1960s. Most were eventually scrapped, though a few were reactivated for Korean War service. The remainder were sold to foreign operators or scrapped immediately post-war. By 1970, fewer than 500 Liberty ships remained in service worldwide, mostly operating for Third World shipping companies. By 1980, the number had dropped to under 100. By 1990, fewer than 10 remained operational. Today, only the 2 museum ships, O'Brien and Brown, remain, preserved as monuments to the program that built them. The scrapping of Liberty ships, which began in the late 1960s and accelerated through the 1970s, marked the end of an era. The vessels that had seemed unlimited in 1944, filling the world's oceans, gradually disappeared into scrapyards. Their steel was recycled, melted down and reformed into new products, continuing to serve but no longer recognizable as the ships that won the logistics war. The environmental impact of Liberty ships, both during construction and disposal, was significant. Building 2,110 ships required approximately 9 million tons of steel, millions of gallons of paint, vast quantities of copper wiring, and countless other materials. The industrial processes generated pollution that 1940s standards didn't address. The scrapping process created similar environmental impacts as thousands of tons of steel were cut apart using methods that released toxic fumes and waste materials. Modern environmental consciousness views this industrial mobilization with mixed feelings. The Liberty ship program achieved its objective, but at environmental costs that wouldn't be acceptable today. This reflects the wartime mindset that victory justified any means, a perspective that modern environmental ethics questions. Yet the fundamental achievement remains impressive. In 4 years, American industry created a merchant fleet larger than the rest of the world combined. The organizational genius required to coordinate materials, labor, and production across 18 shipyards, building identical vessels, was unprecedented. The training programs that turned civilians into shipbuilders in days demonstrated what emergency mobilization could achieve. The Liberty ship program proved that free market capitalism, when properly motivated and organized, could achieve production miracles that centrally planned economies couldn't match. The Soviet Union, despite total government control of industry, never approached American production levels. Germany, with its war economy, couldn't match American output despite mobilizing years earlier. This industrial superiority became a foundation of American post-war power. The factories that built Liberty ships could build anything. The organizational systems that coordinated wartime production could be applied to peaceful purposes. The workforce that learned to build ships in weeks could learn to build anything else equally quickly. The Liberty ship, in this sense, represented more than efficient cargo transport. It represented American industrial capitalism operating at peak efficiency, producing adequate equipment in overwhelming quantities faster than enemies could destroy it. This capability, demonstrated conclusively during World War II, became the foundation for American Cold War strategy and economic dominance in subsequent decades. The legacy lives on in modern shipbuilding, though the industry has changed dramatically. Modern cargo ships are vastly larger, faster, and more efficient than Liberty ships. Container ships carry 10 times the cargo at 3 times the speed. Automation has reduced crew sizes from 40 men to 20. Satellite navigation, radar, and modern safety equipment have made merchant shipping far safer. But the fundamental principles remain. Ships are built in sections, prefabricated and assembled. Welding has completely replaced riveting. Modular construction, pioneered in Kaiser's yards, is standard practice. The assembly line techniques that seemed revolutionary in 1942 are now routine. The Liberty ship program's true significance wasn't the ships themselves, but what they represented. Industrial capacity as a weapon of war, mass production defeating tactical superiority, adequate equipment in overwhelming quantities defeating superior equipment in limited quantities. These concepts, proven in the Atlantic between 1942 and 1945, shaped military thinking for decades. The German officers who underestimated Liberty ships in 1941 made a fundamental error. They assessed the individual vessel and found it wanting. What they failed to assess was American industrial capacity to produce thousands of these adequate vessels. By the time they recognized their error, 2,700 Liberty ships were filling the seas, and the war was lost. The lesson echoes across military history. Underestimate American industrial capacity at your peril. The sleeping giant, once awakened, doesn't fight with elegance or efficiency. It fights with overwhelming quantities of adequate equipment, produced faster than enemies can destroy it, delivered by workers who learned their trades in weeks, organized by systems that prioritize results over tradition. The Liberty ship, crude and unglamorous, exemplified this approach perfectly. It wasn't the best cargo ship ever built. It was adequate, produced in overwhelming quantities, delivered when needed. And that was enough. More than enough. It was victory, welded together in 42 days per ship, painted grey, and launched into seas that Germany could no longer control. The thunder of those launches, hundreds of ships sliding down ways in Richmond, Portland, Baltimore, and other yards, was the sound of industrial might that no enemy could match. The German officers heard it too late to matter. By the time they recognized what those launches meant, the seas were full and the war was decided. Adequate in sufficient quantity had defeated superior in limited numbers. The Liberty ships proved this truth across every ocean, in every theatre, during every campaign. They weren't remembered like battleships or celebrated like aircraft carriers. They just did their job, voyage after voyage, until the job was done and victory achieved. That was enough. It was always enough. And 2,010 times was more than enough. It was overwhelming, decisive, and ultimately victorious.